Microphone check, 1, 2, what is this? It's the 5'7" assassin in the podcast business. I am your host, Rohan Patra, the rap music plug at your service.
Here we are again at the end of a rainbow.
The ability to have tough conversations about complex topics is a real art. It requires not only a great deal of nuanced knowledge on a topic to speak thoughtfully on it, but it also necessitates a great deal of self-awareness and empathy. On the Golem of Brooklyn official soundtrack, Defcee successfully has one of these tough conversations in front of all of us with the community of white Jewish people that he is a part of. Using Adam Mansbach's new novel as inspiration, Defcee depicts thoughtful, funny stories related to Jewish ideals and folklore, and delivers criticisms that he has for his people, delivered though from a place of love and understanding. This concept is further bolstered by the absolutely mystical tone-setting instrumentals from the one and only Messiah Musik that beautifully sets the stage for the thought-provoking and deeply important subject matter that is delivered throughout this record. I am so happy today to have Defcee and Messiah Musik here to dig deep into the makings of one of the best albums of the year, bar none. The Rap Music Plug podcast presented by QLC TV is the remedy to the I don't have anything good to listen to problem. Through in-depth artist interviews, album reviews, and general rap commentary on the best that the underground rap scene has to offer, this is your one-stop shop to knowing what to add to your queue, play next, or pop into your record player. Welcome to the show. Defcee, Messiah Musik, how you guys doing today?
Yo.
I'm good. How are you, Ro?
I am doing very fine. Very happy to talk about this album, talk to you guys. Defcee's second time on the show, Messiah Musik first time. Very happy. Honestly, didn't even expect you to. I know, Messiah approached you virtually maybe like 2 years ago almost, and I was like, man, I think maybe it was maybe 2 years ago or like a year and a half ago, and I was like, man, love to have you on. And you're like, I would love to too, but I'm not like on the podcast scene. I know that's not your thing. So I was kind of surprised when you were down to do this. I was like, this is awesome. So happy to have you here.
Yeah, well, not gonna lie, it makes me a little bit uncomfortable talking on the record, but I'd be remiss to skip an opportunity. I just want to say personally, I appreciate all that you've done to champion the music over the past couple of years. So, no, I'm glad to be here to talk to you, man. And this was a great opportunity to do it. I feel really good about the record and, the reception, talking to you a day after the thing was released. So, yeah, man.
Yeah,
feels good.
I'm really happy to have you on, especially with an album like this to kind of really center the conversation on, and thank you for those kind words as well, for sure. Really appreciate it.
No, I mean it.
Yeah. And I'll be honest with you guys, like I was super excited to hear this album, but I do this with mostly all my favorite artists. I try not to, even though it's kind of impossible, I try not to actually put that high of expectations on it. Like I try to be okay and be like pleased with, a good effort put in and just a good product, like a good record, and just be happy. It doesn't need to be for you guys like Trapdoor level, which blew me away. And I fucking love that record. So many people do. So I was like trying not to expect that level of greatness, but I actually think I like this album more, like straight up, like just, yeah. And I just truly did not expect to say that. I really just was going to be happy with how this is, especially given the context of how this album's created. It's just a very different kind of record for so many ways, so many reasons. I just feel like the way the themes were fleshed out so coherently, so consistently, how the production complemented it, I just was absolutely blown away, honestly.
Well, first of all, thank you for that. That's very kind of you to say. And secondly, the creative process, which I know we'll get into, was so much different than Trapdoor. It was almost like the inverse of that process. The procrastination was the same, but like the actual length of time it took for everything to come together and how it came together was like night and day. So I think part of what for me might be so difficult to believe about people making statements like that is the fact that a lot of these songs were like bursts, were like little creative bursts, as opposed to Trapdoor, which was like written in drafts. Like there were constant small changes in terms of cadence, in terms of syllables. Like it was an album that like there were beats swapped out. We spent so much time on it. And I feel like it was the end result was the ultimate reward of that process. So it's very difficult for me to believe that something that really came together over the course of like 6 to 7 months is on par with Trapdoor. But I think I'm starting to understand why people would feel that way. And I mean, if we did that, then it bodes well for any music we do together in the future. Because if me and Messiah Musik can lock in over a short amount of time and over a long period of time and still produce things that are of comparable quality, then I don't know, man. We're gonna build some pretty cool records together moving forward.
Those spurts sometimes are where the gold is.
Oh, I agree. The scope of both records are so much different too. You know, it seems like Trapdoor is so broad in scope compared to this that obviously had to be a little bit more narrowly focused, being, you know, inspired by the book and being dedicated so much to Adam Mansbach's original work, which is just, you know, I definitely want to get into and honor the story, which I really think that Defcee did a great job of in the lyrics throughout. You know, that was, I guess the biggest thing for me was just like apprehension around the subject matter and how it was going to be executed, and like everyone's appetite to hear like the great American Jewish rap album. So, but
Yeah.
you know, all credit to Defcee for, you know, taking all of my scraps and really like having a fully realized vision, and again just executing so well on it.
Yeah. I mean, I think I want to start right there with like getting into this book, setting the context for those, because obviously the book actually has just been released as of now. Is it September 26th did it release?
Yep.
Yeah. So just been out. Lots of people I'm sure haven't had a chance to read it. So let's talk about really like the main kind of themes of this book, but particularly the idea of the golem and why overall you both felt so drawn to this story and inspired by it.
I mean, Adam had reached out to me January 20th and told me that he was in the final edits, like the final round of edits on his new novel, which is called The Golem of Brooklyn. And that he was inspired by what Skyzoo had did with The Mind of a Saint, which was his album with the other guys, based on the, you know, storylines and characters in Snowfall. And he basically sent me a PDF of the manuscript and said, you know, we can do a single, we can do a short project, we can do a long project, you know, however you're feeling, let's do it. And instantly I read the book in about a day. I think I read the PDF of the book in a day. Wow. And I don't think I'd connected with another work of literature with a Jewish protagonists like this before. And it was because Lynn Bronstein and I share just, you know, a few similarities, I think, as far as like, you know, the kinds of Jewish guys we are, as far as obviously the teaching aspect, as far as how we both handle being put into situations we don't really want to be in. And so it was an easy and quick read for me. And then there were also things that were addressed in the course of the story being told that were really striking in regards to how I was thinking about what it meant to be Jewish and white, and how that intersection played out on a micro scale in my personal life and then on a macro scale globally. And so as a result of all of those thoughts, it was like, oh, it's a no-brainer. Like, let me put together a full-length project based on this. And I put together like a list of producers. Messiah's name was on there. My pie in the sky was Alchemist, because it was like, oh, another Jewish producer. But honestly, nobody else could have, with all due respect to Al and everybody else whose name I put on that list, after listening to the final product, it was like Messiah's name was the only one that should have been there in the first place. And even the beats that he sent when he, all right, I'll double back to the beats in a second, because you asked me about the novel itself. So the novel is about this teacher who's an art teacher at a prestigious prep school in Brooklyn. He steals 400 pounds of clay from his employer, even though he's not a visual artist in his spare time. He's a novelist, but he takes them home. He gets way too high on a weed-laced cookie and winds up getting the idea to build a golem out of this clay, and looks up all of the rituals on Google and does a whole bunch of research, and then mistakenly brings the golem to life, which then sets him forth which then sets forth a series of events that kind of continually spiral out of control. And then along the way, the book has these little Talmudic asides. It also has a lot of hilarious jokes and depictions of stories from the Old Testament that I think if you're a Jewish person, you've heard ad nauseum, especially if you're a Jewish person of a certain age, but it's told in a contemporary way that makes you think and also laugh pretty hard too. And it was, yeah, it just sparked a whole bunch of thoughts for me and ideas. And it was a no-brainer to make something based off of that book. And the soundtrack that Messiah sculpted was amazing too, and fit perfectly as well.
Man, yeah, I mean, I think something that was interesting hearing that is that Adam reached out to you. So what's your relationship with Adam? Because I know he's a quite a famous writer. He's very successful and made a lot of great work. So how did that, like, what's the context behind him even reaching out to you in the first place?
I mean, through the youth spoken word poetry scene, because Adam is also a poet, in addition to he was running around with some pretty serious jazz musicians in Boston in the 80s and 90s. He also was a spoken word artist in the Nuyorican Poets Cafe scene around the time when Doom was premiering there and Sean Price was kickstarting his solo career there. And Adam knew a mentor of mine from when I was in high school, and that mentor brought him to the youth nonprofit that I was taking writing workshops at. And I met Adam then, although I don't recall having met him at that point. My first memories of really sitting down and talking to Adam were from when I was in the scholarship program at the University of Wisconsin called First Wave. And he had been brought in to lead us through some writing workshops and give us feedback on some of our own work. And we just kind of stayed connected online from there. And I've always had a whole lot of respect for Adam and his work, especially because he's one of the few white writers in hip hop who I feel is capable of confronting his own whiteness without coming across as some sort of reverse narcissist. Mm-hmm. And in the process has created like entire industries really from his work. and we just kind of stayed connected through the height of his success. So he wrote a children's book for adults called Go the Fuck to Sleep, which I think I was chopping it up with Woods, and Woods told me his publisher mentioned that book as a blueprint of what they could have done with A is for Anarchists, which is his children's book for adults. And yeah, we just kind of stayed in touch, and he was following my music. I had no idea that that was the case, and he was into it, and he thought I would be a good fit for the project. So that's how that connection happened.
And how directly involved was he post making that initial connection in terms of actually giving, I don't know, input or direction or influencing what you guys actually made on the record?
I'll leave that to, what I'll say is it was a daily involvement, like
Wow.
a near daily involvement. Adam and I were texting almost every day about the project, about ideas. I was sending him screenshots of what I was writing on the computer, pictures of what I was writing on paper. I sent him all of the beats from the initial pack that Dan sent me, and Adam wrote a paragraph about each of those beats and had ideas about, this beat could go in a suite about this subject, or this beat could fit this subject. Was even like talking about how the beats moved like the golem in certain spaces. And it was,
And I cherish those notes, by the way. I just want to say, to have a New York Times best-selling author, like making, writing notes, like 3 pages of notes about my beats, that is something that I'm definitely going to save, even though I think probably 50% of those ended up making it into the final product.
Yeah, because you kept sending fire through. So it was like so I kept swapping things out because you kept sending fire ass beats through, and I just wanted to kind of go off of what I was feeling. And I also wanted to surprise Adam with some of what we were making too. You and I both know.
I felt the same way about that, by the way. That just it's nice to get everyone's buy-in up front, but then also, it's nice to blow some wigs back when the product is actually ready.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, but Adam was very involved. Very, very involved.
That's really interesting how that, I didn't expect to hear that he was that involved. I kind of assumed it was probably an initial link and then he let you guys do your thing. But that's really cool. And speaking of that sound of this record a bit more, I really love about this record that it's very cohesive, but it's very particularly like spiritual in the feeling, which is obviously very, consistent with the subject matter. So Messiah, like, how did making beats for an album based on a book, so a specific kind of set of ideas, and this specific, as you said, narrower focused subject matter, how did that shape the production you created for Golem? Like, did it feel, a bit restricting at first, or did you actually find like more inspiration from the fact that you had such a, distinct subject matter and feel to be going for?
Yeah, well, I would say for me, just in general, limitation breeds more creativity. So that is definitely a concept and a framework that I feel like I work with, just when approaching my beats and my sounds. Anyway, so like I said, probably about 50% upfront, I had kind of an idea of how I thought that the record should sound, because I've been pulling from kind of like Eastern European and kind of like Yiddish, Jewish folklore kind of sounding records for maybe the past 2 or 3 years. Like, not exclusively, but that has definitely been a big part of like the stuff that I've been trying to do, just kind of like independently before Adam even, or before Defcee even hit me about this initiative. So, but yeah, so it was not exactly the way that I pictured initially going in. Like, I think what we ended up with, I've been thinking about kind of the best way to describe the beats. It's like a boom bap kind of like backbone, but it's definitely got like a mystic quality throughout. But again, I think I got to credit that to Defcee and Adam, listening to the beats as I'm sending large swaths of, 50, 100 beats, and them kind of whittling it down to kind of the ones that they want to use and what was moving them and what sounded Golem-y, for lack of a better term. Because yeah, there was definitely a lot of stuff that that I thought could go, but didn't, and I'm blown away by the finished product and the 12 that we ended up with.
I mean, I think you actually bring up a point I didn't think of, is that you've already been, in recent years especially, been making music that lends itself very nicely to this kind of feeling. Like, you always tend to have those like really like interesting percussion that's not really like what do you call it, like very North American. As you said, there's a lot of like different influences getting pulled in, and it always tends to be pretty like ethereal or mesmerizing. Like, I'm thinking of some of the beats you made on like Uncommon NASA's that record too. Like there's when I think about it now, it's such a natural fit. So no wonder it kind of turned out the way it did.
Yeah, thank you. Only child. Shout out to NASA.
Mm-hmm. Shout out to NASA. The guy's got something with Guilty Simpson coming that I'm like so pumped to hear.
Yeah, the single sounds fire, man.
Crazy fire. Yeah. But yeah, I think it just really did a good job of complementing like the subject matter so well, because of all these like all this subject matter just really makes you think about, religious context and spirituality, and it's like so meditative, especially songs like Knights of Broken Glass. That beat is incredible. And
now that was from the original pack, I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. It was also one that you insisted I use.
So that's what I was going to say. There were a couple like that on this one where like there were just so many beats being thrown around, and like not to lose something to kind of like the latest pack. I think it was also the last beat on Thrash Memory, where I might have went back and said, "Yo, like this is one of the ones."
Yeah.
Which is, I think, one of my favorite songs.
Definitely. Same here. I just really love, like you said, Defcee, earlier, when you were talking about what drew you to this book. The thing that I really appreciated was how novel some of the perspectives we're getting on this album really are. The examination of Judaism and being white, that whole kind of concept. I think you put that all forward with such clarity, but also such I think like an honest and like very powerful, to be honest, a very powerful perspective as well. Like, specifically the way this album ends, like Miri's Lament is especially powerful. You're shifting, kind of like you're looking inward to your own community, making observations, critiquing. It's really interesting. And this idea of like perpetuating a cycle of hatred that once you were a victim of as a community, it's just incredible. Like, I think you have a line on Miri's Lament where you're like, when mud becomes dust, will our reflection remain, or will we be a mirror image of vengeance and pain? There's so many moments like that. And then Confederate on the final track, Confederate flags in Tel Aviv, where I feel like the lens is like particularly on like what's happening in Israel. Could you elaborate on the statement or the ideas you were trying to put forward on songs like this, particularly from that lens of looking inward and actually having your issues with how white Jewish people have in America and generally are acting, or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, so the first thing that I want to say, just to preface my answer, is that I think commonly, and this comes from a place of generational trauma and feeling like any division within the Jewish community can be exploited for the gain of people who want to exterminate us. I think that there's always been this misconception that we as Jewish people have, that any Jew who's critical of the Jewish community is a self-hating Jew, or secretly does not want to be a Jew, or is like some sort of Stephen Miller type person who's, just trying to use their Judaism to give them some sort of authority with which they could then turn around and make the Jewish community look worse. And I think for me, it comes more from a place of love and care and understanding and frustration, really, with other white Jewish people that I'm trying to think of a way to put this that is going to be nuanced, because I think that was the goal for me in terms of writing those songs. Was I just wanted to have a nuanced perspective. I think a lot of times we as white people who are Jewish, we cling to the narrative of a past of being oppressed and also a present of being oppressed. If we're talking about Jews in Europe, where there are, governments that are actively anti-Semitic and are oppressing Jews in Europe right now. But I think that we have been pretty safe in America and assimilated into whiteness. And I think a lot of white Jewish people who are powerful, and this is not to say that there's some sort of cabal of rich Jews who meet up once a week in cloaks and robes to decide, on the fate of the Super Bowl or some bullshit like that. But I do think that there are some powerful Jewish individuals who independently ascribe to white supremacy and whiteness as a means of survival, which is not a justification for selling out your community or communities in this country that are significantly more systematically oppressed than ourselves. And it's definitely not an excuse to then further oppress those communities. And it's not an excuse either to essentially treat Palestinian people the way that we've been treated in a lot of other countries when we've been in the minority there. And I think all of that frustration and anger really led me to write music that was trying to express all of that. Because I think that that's the one thing I cling to the most about growing up Jewish, and my identity as a Jewish person has very little to do with, although I admire the resilience of the Jewish community over the millennia, right? But it has very little to do with what Jewish people have survived and a lot to do with what, the most valuable principles of being culturally Jewish have been and how they've sustained throughout time and a lot of people, right? Because the one thing I don't want to say is that while we as a white Jewish community have a lot of work to do in terms of accepting our whiteness and then building bridges in order to subvert our privilege for the benefit of people who don't have it, we also have concepts like tzedakah, which is charity, and tikkun olam, which is healing the world, and the golden rule, which, do unto others as you would want done unto you. And I think those are all principles that I learned through Judaism that have been guiding lights for me throughout my life. So I never want anybody to take what I have to say in songs like that the wrong way, but I'm also disappointed and frustrated with a lot of white Jewish people. And I felt like I needed to have a very real conversation with my community on that song. And, that's really what drove my writing that. And then a lot of those other conversations were just sparked by characters or events in the book. And the one thing that I wanted to do over the course of writing this record was to create songs that had an impact outside of just their relationship to the novel. And I think that with songs like Mary's Lament and Nights of Broken Glass, that's what happened.
I think you threaded a really delicate needle here in honestly, I think it was maybe my, I don't know, fourth or fifth listen where it all really started to click, kind of what you were saying, and the subject matter was starting to resonate. And I think you did a great job of finding that balance to come with, as you said, a perspective of love, but be very real and honest about, what we're doing here in this situation isn't right. And we can't accept this just because of that generational trauma that you speak of. I think it's just really hard for you to do what you did, but I think you did an incredible job. And I I'm also thinking that I can't help but acknowledge the context of these challenging ideas you explore on the album being released during a time where I feel like anti-Semitism has been kind of like more elevated in the mainstream consciousness with like, certain pop culture events and a lot of other things. I am aware that you said, I think in the album description on Bandcamp, that this is a type of idea or, subject matter you always wanted to make. But, and then obviously Adam reaches out to you. That's likely the catalyst for why you did it. But my thinking is, was the recent heightened attention of these topics surrounding Jewish people, Israel, anti-Semitism at all like an influence into compelling you to provide your perspectives in this very specific moment?
I mean, it was running concurrent with the creation of the album. I think that's what's so crazy. It's like you have a lot of these, if we're talking about making music between late January of this year and late August, which I think is when we turn the album in, the mastered, finished version of the album. So much happened in that time where anti-Semitism was being addressed. And I just felt like, damn, we're falling back into the same, that we have as a white Jewish community, have the same conversations every time somebody who's Black and has a platform has something to say that strikes us as anti-Semitic. That's where we direct all of our ire. That's where we direct all of our fury. But then if you think about the structure of the United States, especially as it pertains to institutional racism, we're also directing our fury at people who have very little recourse to harm us physically. Obviously, I mean, the thing I don't want to underscore, and somebody called me out on this on Twitter, and I think I appreciated that they did. Obviously it's painful and it hurts to hear somebody say something and implicate you in some sort of non-existent conspiracy that they're reckoning with painful fallout from. But also at the same time, these are celebrities we're talking about. These are athletes. Yes, these are people with platforms and influence, but these are also people without the kind of institutional power that could be wielded in very negative ways. And if I think about somebody like the man who shot up the synagogue in Pittsburgh and killed 11 people, that was not somebody who was inspired by anything that Kanye said or anything that Steven Jackson said or anything that Kyrie Irving posted on Twitter. That was somebody who was inspired by white supremacists. The worst, most violent crimes committed against Jews on American soil were committed by white Gentiles. So why is it that that's not who we're having conversations about as a community? Why is it that the conversations that we're having are about people who ultimately are saying hurtful things, but that's where it stops? You know what I'm saying?
I appreciate especially hearing this kind of perspective at a time where I feel like we talked about just now, established, this topic is really in the mainstream and a lot of discourse, but it's often not really Jewish people that have the loudest voices. A lot of times it's people who are not of the community interjecting, and I feel like often speaking on behalf of Jewish people. I think honestly trying to mean well a lot of times, trying to stand up for what they think is messed up or whatever. But I feel like that often happens with, when a minority is thrust into like the cultural zeitgeist. You see this with like Black issues a lot. You see white people kind of having this big voice and kind of speaking for things where maybe that's not the most productive. And often they miss the context and aren't speaking correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that honestly, at the same time, the Jewish people who do have the biggest voice oftentimes do not use it responsibly. And there are a lot of people, like if I think about it, Ben Shapiro.
No, I was literally going to say Ben Shapiro. Yeah.
He's Jewish. He's a fucking asshole. You know what I mean? So, and the things that he talks about are very regressive. And he uses his Judaism essentially as like both a shield and a weapon. He weaponizes it when he wants to argue in favor of a Zionist state. and he uses it as a shield to protect himself from any valid criticism of his points about subjects like that. And I don't have any interest in doing that. Like, that's, at this point, would be us as a white Jewish community having a litany of red herring arguments that ultimately do us no good and don't do any good for anybody else either. And if the goal of us being Jews is to heal the world, that's the world. That's not just our world. That's not just our community. That's the world at large. So if we're seeing injustice committed against everybody who's not a white Jewish person in the United States, then that should be our focus. Our focus should be on, whether it's on an interpersonal level, whether it's on a level of mass influence or public conversation, or, you know, building together as nonprofits, whatever, right? Like, however we choose to do it, if our goal is to heal the world, that doesn't mean just for ourselves. And so to see people in the Jewish community who are just so selfish about that shit, it always angers me and frustrates me and annoys me. And ultimately, what's underneath all of those emotions is sadness.
Yeah.
I mean, it saddens me more than anything. So, you know, they're necessary conversations. They're the kinds of conversations I've been thinking about for a long time. They're also conversations that are inspired by years of listening to people like Billy Woods and listening to Arm & Hammer and Elucid. I mean, those guys have very nuanced perspectives on the world around them. And I've definitely followed that lead in terms of how I look at the world around me. And one of the most difficult things to do is to have a nuanced perspective on something as divisive as anti-Semitism. But that was what I wanted to do anytime I addressed it on this record. And I think it's something that the novel does an excellent job of doing without coming across as heavy-handed, and I wanted to honor that with the music.
Yeah, and I think you guys both did that really well.
I did want to just add on. I mean, it's hard to add on to any of that because, first of all, Defcee is so well-spoken and also threading the needle, you know, as far as even the conversation around, you know, what the intent was behind some of those tracks. But I do think that just the Jewish religion does, there's a lot of, I think, conceptually within the Jewish religion, you know, the Jewish texts like the Talmud and the Midrash, I think those are the ones where, you know, it's really all about taking, you know, those themes, those ancient kind of tropes of Judaism, and then rabbis and Jewish scholars taking those things and kind of looking at modern issues and social issues that pop up and kind of comparing those ancient, ways. I think that those things, there's room for those loving and caring discussions in the Jewish community for us to have amongst ourselves. So I wanted to mention that as well.
Yeah, and I do wonder also, how did creating this album help you, if at all, more deeply understand your identity as a white Jewish person and learn maybe something new about how you want to show up differently in the future?
Well, so I wouldn't say so much that it taught me, you know, any new insights or new learnings as a Jewish person, but more what I thought was really interesting and what resonated with me was hearing, you know, all of these ancient tropes and these stories that we heard, you know, as Jewish kids in the Hebrew school. I mean, I went to Hebrew school 3 days a week, which I'm sure was, you know, just as much daycare as a Jewish education for me. But nonetheless, you know, some of it sunk in. And taking those stories and then just giving it this refreshed narrative style that I thought was really dope. This refreshed, updated background. It's being set in Brooklyn, and then all of the other sequence of events and various locations that the story takes place and goes on from there.
Yeah, I would say it gave me language to support things I was already feeling.
Well said. Yeah.
I would say that was either the events of the book or the conversations I've had about the book, the conversations Dan and I have had via text message about the book. I mean, it's really that's what it's done, is it's kind of solidified these thoughts in ways that I hadn't really thought about before. And I think the other thing about putting this project together too, that was so fun, was like how many times, if I think about a show, like, this is going to take a bit of a left turn, but I referenced George Costanza on the album. So if I think about a show like Seinfeld, right? Like Jerry on the show, Jerry's parents, they're very Jewish without having to constantly hit you over the head with their Jewishness. And I think that's something that the book does very well. And it's something that, you know, I think Dan and I, or Messiah and I, can both relate to this from our personal lives. We kind of lead our lives in the same way, where it's being Jewish is definitely a major part of my identity, but it's not the entire part of my identity. And it's not something that I feel like I have to dress up in a certain way to get people to take seriously. And I grew up, in fact, with people who were shocked that I was Jewish. I grew up as one of 5 or 6 Jewish kids at a grade school of like 150. And when I would tell people I was Jewish, they were shocked, because they would tell me straight up, like, you don't really have the nose for it. So, you know, like hearing things like that as I was growing up around people who weren't really Jewish, and then also seeing my father, and because my mom was raised Irish Catholic and then converted to Judaism before she married my dad, so that all me and my brothers could be born Jewish and raised Jewish and be bar mitzvahed. But even the way that my dad talked about being Jewish was deeper than just, you know, the kinds of things that people would depict as being Jewish in film and television. You know, like my idea of Judaism looks more like Jerry and his parents on Seinfeld than it does, I don't know, Woody Allen or the Marx Brothers or things of that nature, you know?
Yeah. And speaking of Seinfeld, Lord Costanza the Third, that's like a great example of this album. Something I don't want to get lost in this conversation, because obviously we've been focusing on like the crux of like the very real and important subject matter. But this album, and I'm imagining this book as well, as you're describing it, has a lot of lightness and moments of levity too. Like this is a very pretty easy to digest album, more than you'd imagine if you have not checked this album out yet. Like you got that line on that track, Lord Costanza the Third, you're like, in diner sipping coffee as my hair is thinning oddly, that Indianapolis Colts logo pattern baldness, that fucking got me going. I was like, wow, that's so good. That's so genius.
As a big Seinfeld fan, that track is the gift that keeps giving, because
I love Seinfeld.
You recognize, you peel back the references there.
Yeah.
Man, that is so good. And one thing I'm wondering about this concept particularly is like, how did having the book as the main primary source material affect how the writing was approached? Particularly the question I'm going to ask is like, how much of this was personal experience that you're drawing from versus just pulling from the concepts already laid out in the book and just working with that?
I mean, the material that I wrote over the course of putting the album together, which, you know, I'm sure we'll talk about the material that didn't make the album at some point, but it was kind of a healthy dose of both. But if I'm going to make a soundtrack based on the novel, then obviously that's the material that's going to make the final cut. And I kind of like that Lord Costanza the Third is on there, because I feel like it's I think where it is in the album is at a point where things could veer melodramatic. And then you have a very like with thrash memory, and then there are a bunch of very, you know, very from light to dark, but like a lot of high stakes songs that come before then. And then Lord Costanza is there. And I feel like, again, like that's me. And then it switches from there into Kosher Nostra and you know, the back half of the album where things get a little bit more serious. But it was 50-50. That was all a very long-winded way of me saying it was about 50-50.
I'd love to get in some favorite songs before we wrap this up. Start with Messiah Music. What are one or two tracks that you just think are your absolute
So I
go-tos?
mentioned Thrash Memory earlier, and it's not just for the last track. I like all three of the suites, how they just go from one to the next. In fact, I think the second suite might be my favorite
Mm.
of the three. I just love how the track came together. I like how it fades out also on Mansbach's narration there. I love that clip in particular. Something about it. Kosher Nostra. So I'm glad Defcee mentioned DJ Frayne. Cuts were just phenomenal. Really brought something different to that track that I'm really proud to be a part of. So those two for sure. I mean, we talked about the Costanza track. What else? There was one. There was at least one other that I'd be remiss in not mentioning. Come back to me. Come back to me.
Okay.
Defcee, you talk a little bit about some of our other songs, and I'm sure.
I actually like Procession of the Grand Rebbe a lot. I like that joint.
Mm.
I like that. That's like one of my favorite hooks I think I've ever written. So that was definitely something that I was proud of. And even the re-recording of the verse kind of unlocked a bunch of stuff in the recording of all of the other songs where the delivery was a bit looser and freer, and there was a bit more last minute kind of on the spot improvisation that happened with that song in order to fit the beat. So that song is special to me. And the theme song, the Golem of Brooklyn theme song, I think was like another example of a moment when I was able to do something with song structure that was pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Hipster Kebab, for sure. The song from the perspective of the Bodega Cat in the book, that was a lot of fun to write and work on. And Lord Costanza the Third is one of my favorite songs that I've ever done. So all of those for sure. And Confederate Flags in Tel Aviv, obviously, as well.
The one that I really wanted to mention that was escaping me earlier was Creation Myth, Len Stewart.
Yeah.
There's something about that track particularly that I've just from the moment that Defcee shared it with me, I thought that was just a standout. But I really dig the sequencing up front, how it's like just more up tempo than what we typically do. So I thought it was a different look.
Yeah. I mean, I love all the tracks you're mentioning, obviously. I think mine is Knights of Broken Glass. I think I mentioned that earlier. I think the conviction in the rhymes and then that just disoriented and like, I don't know if it's like asynchronous drums or it's just something weird about it. It's like unwinding. It's just the vocal percussion loop. It's amazing. I love that song so much. I really like those last three tracks, like back to back to back. Just, yeah, phenomenal work.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, this was, first of all, Creation Myth was a lot of fun to do because I think that was the first rhyme I wrote from the perspective of one of the characters for the soundtrack. And also, I just love that beat. That beat is amazing. Yeah, to be able to rhyme on that was definitely, I felt like I stole a beat from somebody else. That's how good I felt about that beat. I was like, ha, you don't got this one.
Defcee came with a lot of different flows throughout this record.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was on my Jay-Z Woods thing. Like, I think those are two things that Jay and Woods do a good job of, is they approach rapping with an ease and comfort with their delivery, but they do it in a way that's not so hyper technical that it gets in the way of the musicality of their delivery. So I think that was something that was definitely influential on me as I was making the album, was trying to keep that in mind. And yeah, it's hard. I keep thinking of stuff to say, including Boathouse. Man.
Oh, yes.
Boathouse, I thought, and I think Trapdoor is, just because Willie Green is a goddamn genius. at the risk of sounding black. I think Green is a damn genius, and to hear what he brought out of those beats was phenomenal. And to hear Boathouse's approach to mixing and mastering Messiah's production and how seamless the soundtrack sounds as a result of that, I really loved that. The way he mixed Adam Mansbach's voiceovers into, and Adam
So that's
also.
That's Adam's voice. I never
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
cool.
They do have a similar timbre and quality in your guys' voices. I thought that in the first time I
Well,
listened to
I
it.
didn't think it was Defcee, but I just thought it was. I thought it could have been like I didn't even. Yeah, I honestly thought it might have been like a movie clip. Like I didn't know if it was new or not. You
Yeah,
know.
yeah, no, those were clips he sent. Like he sent me a long audio track,
Hmm.
like MP3 of him reading particular snippets of the book I'd given him to read aloud, because we were initially going to pull from the audio book, but it wasn't going to work out timeline wise with what our deadline was looking like.
Mm-hmm.
And so we wound up doing that instead. But Adam, again, like he had the final say on how much we used of those voiceovers that he sent through. So that too was like, I mean, I can't thank Adam enough either. It's just, again, this is something I'm going to say over and over again, no matter how cliche this phrase is, but this was a labor of love for everybody involved in it. For me, for Dan, for RTC, for Aiden, I think, or for Boathouse, for Messiah Musik. Sorry, I keep slipping and calling my
All
friends
good.
by given names. But yeah, I mean, it was just, I think that all shined through in the final product, and I feel incredibly fortunate to be able to work with the people I work with, everybody I just named for certain, and then also to get that kind of vote of confidence from Adam Mansbach to trust me to turn that novel into music was, while it was certainly a very intimidating prospect up front, in hindsight, it's one of the biggest compliments anybody could have given me as a rapper.
Yeah, man. I think I again I just keep going back to like I feel like the task for what you both were trying to achieve was pretty tall. And I think you achieved it. Like I really got nothing else to say. I think it was just a pretty big roaring success, in my opinion. I love this is gonna be definitely one of the best albums of the year, no matter what happens.
Wow.
And
Thank
it's
you.
just I just hope to hear you guys work more together. I know there's gonna be something else coming this year, but just even past that, you guys have such great chemistry, and it's just this was a really captivating and I feel really deeply important album, and I hope everybody checks this out. I appreciate what you guys do, and I obviously appreciate you guys coming on to speak with me.
Thank you, man. Thank you. And here, I'll help you out as far as future projects past what's coming out this year. Since we're not going to have video, I'll just show this to you.
Okay.
Hold on. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah. So there we go. Project number one, title, already got this many beats. So 16 beats picked for it. So there we go. And then, can you see that?
I can see it. Yeah. Yeah, I can see it. Wow.
Okay. And then this other joint, which will probably be the first follow up before we get into, and a lot of these songs have already been recorded in some way, shape, or form. So,
Wow.
Oh,
yeah.
you got to send me some updated screenshots.
Nah, man, these are the screenshots, bro. These are the screenshots. Trust me. But yeah, thank you for having us on, and I appreciate the kind words about the project. I mean, so much of this was written in the coffee shop across the street from the studio, like with so little time before the studio session, because I spent months battling imposter syndrome that was telling me that like I was gonna fuck up this opportunity over and over again. This was something that I was texting Dan about. This is something I was texting Adam about. This is something I talked to Aiden about in the studio. This is something I talked to RTC about via text message. Like that was kind of the thing that kept me. I thought about nothing but this project for months. And so it really took me sitting down and just writing what I was feeling at whatever point before I went to the studio to really spur me into action. And I think that's what led to the final product being something that people are so appreciative of. And one day, I think I will like this project as much as everybody else does. But for right now, all I can think about is the amount of stress that went into making it and the amount of relief I feel that it's out and people love it. So thank you for putting on for us, man. I appreciate you.
Man, thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Defcee. Thanks, Messiah Musik. All love.
Thank you very much, man. Thank you for having us. I'm eager to do more. You'll hear more from us.
Yeah. Can't wait. Can't wait.
Peace.
All right. Take care. Bye.
You too. Peace.
So there we have it. Another episode of the Rap Music Plug podcast presented by QLC TV. I hope this episode gave you some new perspectives and insights into what the greatest art form known to man in hip-hop music has to offer. If you want to support the show in the most meaningful way possible, it would be my absolute honor to have you as a patron in the new Rap Music Plug podcast Patreon. Through this Patreon, you will be getting exclusive content such as bonus episodes, exclusive album recommendations, exclusive playlists, early access to episodes, and more. And above all, though, you will be able to support the show directly in a way that will not only justify the crazy amount of time I spend on this show already, but allow me to cover some of the expenses related to supporting all of these great artists that we cover on the show through the website, and will allow us to sustain and build on this amazing growth that the RMPP has experienced recently. So if you have any questions about any of the Patreon stuff, or just want to keep tabs on the show, interact with me on rap music and all the great stuff that we can talk about, follow me on Twitter and Instagram at rapmusicplugpod, or shoot me an email at qlctv.podcast@gmail.com. You can also rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify as well. But that's enough self-promotion for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Peace.